Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear.
Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the OG Dr. Neil Holmes and the oral historian, Andre Taylor. Today, we have a special guest in the building, but before we get to that, Dr. Holmes, you wanted to talk about a document that we were discussing briefly.
Yeah, just real briefly, there's an interesting report that our viewers might want to listen out for, pay attention to. It's the report of the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. It's a hearing that was held. It was organized by the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. So we have lawyers and legal minds from all around the world: Barbados, India, South Africa, France, Costa Rica, the UK, Pakistan, Japan, Jamaica, Nigeria, and so forth. And essentially what they said was that the United States was breaking international law in its treatment of African people in this country. And I'll just leave with just this one statement that they made. They said, under the color of law, Black people are targeted, surveilled, brutalized, maimed, and killed by law enforcement officers with impunity. And so this is in the tradition of the We Charge Genocide document that came before the UN back in the 1940s, in the tradition of Malcolm taking similar action with the UN. And so we're going to see that the eyes and ears of the world are looking at our treatment by the United States, and in particular by its police forces. And some of this is going to go before international bodies in the near future. So I want our audience to stay attuned and keep their ears out. And if you're in an area where there's been some mistreatment, you might want to be able to try to get some people to testify in any upcoming hearings.
And you know what's interesting about that whole piece, it's good to know that the eyes of the world are on America. But what's interesting is that when I talk to even some Black people and they say, we're so concerned about police violence against our people, but Blacks kill Blacks. You know, we've had this discussion before. And the interesting thing to me is that everybody kills their own people, because you usually kill who you're associated with. 70% of the times, you know your killer. And since most people associate with their own race of people in most cases, it's just natural that it's going to be mostly your own people who kill you. But the difference between that and with the police violence is that if I kill one of you and I do it in plain sight, I'm going to prison for that. You know, there's not going to be any like, oh, I shot Dre, but oh, I feared for my life because Dre is a big guy. No, I'm going to go to prison for that. And I understand when people say all lives matter. I get that. But what they don't understand is that we're trying to say Black lives need to be a part of those lives when you say all lives. And I really hate to hear blue lives matter, because when people say blue lives matter, for one thing, I don't know if they're talking about the Smurfs, so they're talking about, you know, the characters in Avatar, because as far as I know, nobody is born blue, you know, but you're born Black, you're born white, you're born Latino, but you choose to be a police officer at great risk. Hey, you know, I can't deny that. But if I kill a police officer in plain view, I'm going to prison as well. So all of those arguments to me are just smoke screens when we talk about this issue. And another thing I want to talk about briefly, and before we, you know, introduce our guest, I don't know if any of you saw this, but Farrakhan spoke at DMX's funeral. And so I guess he gave a riveting speech, as he usually does, whether, you agree with everything he says or whatever. The man's a great orator, just like Barack Obama was. And I think Damon John, one of the founders of FUBU, and he now appears on Shark Tank, he tweeted out, "Great speech, brother." And then I don't know what kind of backlash he got, but then he felt the need to come out and apologize for giving Farrakhan, these accolades. And to me, I just get so tired of that. And I understand, I didn't hear this, but I understand that Iverson apologized, Allen Iverson, what's my man used to play for the Miami Heat, Dwayne Wade, they had all given him accolades, then kind of walked back. I don't know if it was sponsorships or whatever, but that's just so interesting to me because, when we were in elementary school and we were taught that George Washington was a great man, Thomas Jefferson was a great man. Then when you point out to somebody where they were slave owners, it's like, oh, okay, whatever. But it's no heartfelt apology. Like, I'm going to apologize to you for saying that they're great people. They stand by that. So I just hope that, we can break those chains of that supremacy, that white supremacy, where we feel we have to apologize and bend our knees all the time. But I don't want to spend the whole time on that. Like I said, we have a special guest in the building today, or I shouldn't say in the building, on the Zoom today with us. Now this is somebody I've known since he was in kindergarten, and I was only in the first grade. I don't want to give you the impression I'm that much older than him, so I can't give him that. But he is an esteemed former educator. He has his own nonprofit, and he is an author, and we're going to talk about all that. But just welcome to the show, Mr. Ron Alexander. Ron, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing well, man. So grateful for the invite. Thank you so much to be here with you, Neil, and Dr. Taylor.
Hey, thanks for joining us, brother. Now, let's talk about your career in education, because we're all educators as well. Dre and Dr. Holmes are in higher education. I'm in secondary education. I've been doing that for a while. Now, tell us first about your career, how you got into education, and your travels in that space.
Man, I followed the educational flow chart. Believe it or not, I started off as a lunch aide at Westwood Elementary School because my mom was the secretary.
I remember
and so
that.
I got so used to that. I had a great mentor, which was Mr. Patillo, who happened to be the principal of the school that my mom put in that position. And so he was a great mentor for me, even at a young age in my early 20s when I was looking for some type of employment.
Mm-hmm.
So I wound up going to community college as a lunch aide. From there, I went to Kent State and never turned around. I got my undergraduate from Kent in 1996. I got my graduate from Cleveland State in 1998. In 2007, I moved to Arizona and got into administration. When I arrived in Arizona, I used to work for the Department of Education as a representative for the state. And then I went into being an administrator. I started off as a principal, became a director of education, in which I oversaw 3 schools and the principals at those schools. And then I became a principal of a high school, which was a first for me, but I knew how to focus on the learning, and that was my key to being successful in the high school. And so during that stint, I was able to improve 4 schools in the state of Arizona. And that's my path.
Now, was it an adjustment for you coming from Warrensville, where we both come from, that was, majority African-American, out to Arizona, which I assume probably was not majority African-American?
And it still isn't. But I had to adjust more to the sun than the people, the youth, because things are still the same. From Midwest to West Coast, you still have students struggling to communicate with teachers and parents, parents struggling to communicate with schools. And then the community blames them both for the disrespect and the negativity that they endure from all.
Now, in 2019, did you retire, or you just decided to change career paths? How'd
Man,
that?
I had, believe it or not, in 2018, I had probably my most productive experience. And 2018, I turned the alternative school around for the first time from being an F to a B school. Because of that, I was given 8 scholarships to provide to students to go to community college for 2 years for free, a full ride for a community college. That's pretty good for a kid in an alternative school or coming out of an alternative school.
Right.
I was provided an opportunity through one of my partnerships to give every senior in the school system a job. It was working at a kiosk through Home Depot. I did so well that the owners of that kiosk came to the school and asked if I can fill the 9 stores in the city of Phoenix area. I also raised $10,000 and gave it to the charter holder. First time that was done in 20 years they've been open. I had a phenomenal year, man. Everything was growing great. 2019, we got some new leaders in. They were already known for being corrupt in Tucson, and they brought that to Phoenix and just disrupted the most successful year I've ever had in 30 years.
Wow.
And the corruption that seemed to have taken place, I think the most disheartening thing for me was not necessarily being let go, because I've been down that road before. Sometimes, you know, things just don't work out. The problem I had was these leaders were being allowed to make these adverse decisions that were affecting educational opportunities for kids and careers of people under the watchful eye of the state. You guys being educators, when you're a fail in school, you have a state representative that's present in the school to ensure that all the decisions being made are to improve the school. So this person is witnessing these negative things from the new leaders of the school, and it's as though they were working in teams. And that's what prompted me about this book, because I believe that when students have to fight hierarchy such as that, they'll never have a winning chance as a good education.
Well, that's a good jump off point, because I was going to ask what prompted you to write the book. So why don't we talk about that and tell us about the book?
Well, it was it's some positive. The purpose of the book was to bring some positive strategies and awareness to the parents in the inner city. A lot of times, the biggest problem with parents in school is the lack of communication or lack of awareness. There's always some information that's being missed from either half, and it causes a disruption in the communication. So I wrote about a few things that I thought would help parents out and strengthening that communication with the school, and also providing some strategies that they can use at home to help their kids out, since they're at home now because of this online learning, because of the pandemic. Second reason I wrote it was to provide tools for teachers that just continue to suffer and exiting the black hole of underperforming. I've been successful with 4 schools, so I just shared all the strategies that I implemented in the 4 schools, and hopefully it'll provide some relief to teachers. And then the negative side talks about how hierarchy has a negative impact on schools. And if that's not taken care of immediately, I'm afraid that we're going to move into a stage of graduates becoming functional illiterate. Mm-hmm. And I definitely need to avoid that.
Now, you say that you are talking about communication with parents and educators, and I agree that is key for success for the student. When you were let go of the position that you were in after having a successful year, it seems like you would have had the communication with the parents going. What happened after you left with those parents? Were they still trying to reach out to you, or was there any more communication with them going forward?
Man, I feel like you already read the book. Man, you know, I thought I was going to a meeting, and I was supposed to meet with the superintendent and a reading specialist, and I figured something was confusing, because why would I need to meet with a reading specialist? I'd meet with hierarchy, not reading specialist. Well, come to find out, they came to the school to let me know that I didn't get a job for the following year that I applied for, and that my services were no longer needed. I said, well, wait a minute, I'm here for to hear about the results of the interview. I don't even know what you're talking about regarding my services. It's been a year later. I still don't have paperwork. I don't know why I've been released. I haven't been given any termination paperwork to this day. I mean, this school is just running a corrupt operation. And I just got to speak up about it because unfortunately, I believe that this takes place in many inner city schools that's continuing to fail. I was released over a year ago, and I'm still waiting for paperwork to this day as I speak to you. And this is under the watchful eye of the state. And so the parents had no idea I was gone because they didn't let me communicate with my parents to let them know I was leaving. The only way that they found out that I was leaving was because we were working remotely because of the pandemic. So parents called me as my phone was still connected to the school line, saying, Mr. Alexander, when are you gonna schedule my kid? He expected to graduate this year. It was then I had to inform her, I thought the school sent you a letter. They wouldn't allow me to send one home to my parents. I'm no longer working with the school. They had no idea, and they left my name in place as though I was still there. So the parents would think it's my fault that I'm not scheduling these kids.
Well, you're talking the same state that voted to not have Martin Luther King's birthday be a holiday. So this isn't a shocker to me.
Right, right. But you know, it's the people in the state that's the problem.
I could believe that. Now, at the same time, when you were let go, and at the same time you wrote the book or started writing the book, is that also the same time you started your nonprofit organization?
I had a lot of that in the works prior to. The release just escalated it for me. And so I was already putting my thoughts together and how I wanted to write this book and how I wanted this nonprofit to play out based on what I've been seeing over the past 3 years, again, regarding this corruption. And here's what I'm talking, here's another example. I've been with this school for 3 years. I just told you about the success that I've had. The school was in underperformance and they still won't evaluate me as a principal because they feel as though, well, if you don't work for us, you're on your own. So they're not going to assist with promoting me to move on. But an evaluation is not an observation, it's a state mandate. So how do you tell the state that you're not going to evaluate the principal? I bet you every superintendent in the country would like to be able to do that.
Right.
And so I went 3 years at this school that's an underperforming and they still haven't given me an evaluation. That makes it very difficult to move on because I can't prove the accolades that I claim I have.
So now, did they get rid of you because you did too good a job, or did they get rid of you because you did such a good job that now they can come in and reap the benefits of your good job?
Boy, I would have to say it was both, but I believe it's more so the first one because it wasn't just me. As I talked about in my book, I had a principal who have achieved the same thing for the first time as well, and they let her go 5 minutes after they let me go, and she achieved the same thing. I believe it's because this couple, who happens to be a husband and a wife, they don't like people that have achieved success without them because they want everything to run through them as though they're the headliner for why everything is happening. Well, I achieved this success before they arrived. Now, because I have 30 years in the game, you just can't pour water in my face and tell me it's raining. So when you're talking about these students, I expect for you to be backing it up with scientific evidence, so I'm gonna challenge you on it. I have a public school background, and that's sometimes a threat when you're in a charter school because that background allowed me to be the most educated as it pertains to school on campus. And so I believe they just feel threatened by the knowledge that I had.
Have you considered any legal recourse for this?
You know, when you're working in a charter system, they have a policy and a right to work state that you can remove anybody, but there are still processes that you need to take. Now, if they would have just at-willed me, which is what you do in a charter school if you want to terminate someone, but they don't have that knowledge, so they didn't do that. And so I'm still waiting a year and a half later. when I called DES, they reached out because I had to go through unemployment. And I looked on DES account and the case is still open. So that means that they haven't tried to provide a reason to DES why I was let go, because once they do that, that now has to come to me. And they can't lie. If you say you evaluated me, you have to show it. I don't have a signature on there. And so I don't even know where to go from this point, because charter school rules are so much more loose than public.
Now, are you interested in getting back into education at all, or you're more satisfied with your nonprofit and just moving into being an author?
Well, you know, I really don't know, man. I want to be able to help kids on a larger realm. I just got enough knowledge that I want to be able to share with kids that's having trouble across the country. But this is new for me, this nonprofit, and I'm just getting it off the ground. And so I see how well it goes. But if I need to get back into the world of education, I'm ready.
Okay, now it's called Inner City Life Coach. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? What exactly are you doing with your nonprofit right now? I know you're just getting it off the ground though.
Absolutely. I talked about the communication line, and Mr. Taylor had an understanding of what I was referring to with that. And so one of the things that I want to do is strengthen that line of communication between home and school. I also want to provide some type of mentorship, as Mr. Patillo did for me when I was coming up, and for you and all the other students that grew up with us.
Right.
So I want to provide that. When you're working in the inner city, sometimes these parents have multiple jobs that they have to attend, and they have a little difficulty with making sure that they're tracking specific information that they want, that they need to be aware of regarding their child. I want to track that for them. I want to release some of that burden for them. I want to come in as that advocate and help them make sure that those conversations are going the right way and that those services really are being provided. The school that I was referring to a few minutes ago, these people would cancel special ed services and use that teacher as the substitute.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, so they just, and again, this is under the watchful eye of the state. And so that was enough for me to say, I got to find a different way to going about helping these kids get educated.
So that means a special ed or several special ed students aren't getting their accommodations. And
man, I don't think they've been getting it for quite some time. They only have one special ed teacher in the system, and it's over 100 SPED kids in the school system.
Now, it's interesting because all of us are, have some degree of experience in education. But what would you say to a parent in this situation? I know that's probably, part of your mission with the nonprofit. What would you say to them? Like, how can they make sure that their child is not being cheated? Because if I'm uneducated about this process and I have a special ed student, and then this happens at the school, they take the special ed teacher, make them into a substitute. What would you tell these parents to do?
Well, they need to be more vocal. They need to make sure services are being provided. And if the special ed teacher didn't provide services for that day, for whatever reason, that's a federal law, so that shouldn't even be touched. But if for whatever reason that occurs, they need to make sure that those services were provided the next day, or that they were made up somehow, some way. It's not okay for them to just be let go and move on until they're provided again the following day. That's unacceptable.
Definitely.
Now in Arizona, you have another thing I want to use my nonprofit to help. You have a lot of uneducated teachers in the classroom in Arizona. And that's a major issue, because we don't just go to school to teach. We go to school to teach. We go to school to analyze data. We go to school to manage 30 to 120 behaviors per day. We go to school to communicate. We go to school to learn how to help struggling students. So when you bypass the things that helps us become an educator, because you're going through this charter system and they feel you don't need any of these qualifications, well, then how do you expect that person to get this kid to pass a test?
Now that's
How do
really,
you know they even have the skills needed to help educate a child? You just sticking a body in a classroom.
that's real important, because Malcolm X used to say, and Dr. Holmes could probably quote him better than I can, like if you're poor, you live in a poor neighborhood, and if you're in a poor neighborhood, you go to a poor school, right? So now we have this issue, and I want to hear everybody's opinion on this. Now we have this issue of school choice. You know, I understand that Donald Trump had touted school choice, and some conservatives tried to use that to say, well, see, Donald Trump is trying to help the inner city because he believes in school choice. And then some people that were, you know, on the Democratic side were saying, well, yeah, you have school choice, but then you're destroying the schools in the inner cities. So what do you think about school choice?
You talking to me? Am I going?
Yeah, Ron, you first.
Okay.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you have school choice, but it's not like a lot of the kids in the inner city have the transportation to go to whatever school they really want to go to, especially if it's outside the city. So I don't even see how it's purposeful. Most of the kids in their city got to go to the closest school to their resident. And so I think school choice is good if it really is school choice. You got some of these schools in Arizona, when they open under their charter rules and regulation, that they don't accept kids who have below a 3.0. That's not school choice.
Right. Now,
and so I don't really know if it's purposeful and if it's serving a need, definitely not to the inner city, maybe to some of these kids in more affluent areas because they had the transportation to get to this school or that school, but not the inner city.
Now, Dre, you went to a school in Philly that was considered a neighborhood school, a comprehensive high school. And basically you were able to thrive, you know, and be successful. So what's your take on the whole school choice piece?
I would say, like you said, Ben Franklin is considered a neighborhood school, but so is Overbrook High School. Overbrook High School was 5 minutes walking from where I lived, but I chose to take public transportation about a little over an hour to get from my home to Ben Franklin. But I was in a different situation. Like going into high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do career-wise. I wanted to be a sports journalist. And I figured I'm going to write about sports. I don't want to just write about X's and O's and all that other kind of stuff, but I wanted to understand the dynamics of the body, the physiology, the anatomy. And Ben Franklin had a program that was geared toward that. And for me, it was the choice of saying, if I know I want to do a certain thing, I'm going to have to go somewhere to get the founding for that. And it worked. You know, I parlayed what I learned in that program into a 15-year career in journalism before becoming an oral historian on a collegiate level. So I'm for it, and I hear the argument against and what it presents, and I agree with that as well. Philadelphia has had an implosion of charter schools. You know, I have a cousin that's graduating in a couple of weeks, and I don't know the name of the school. You know, I know the core 20 schools that were high schools when I was there, but now there's more than 30 schools in Philadelphia, and a lot of them are charter schools now. And they say they're geared towards certain things, but I'm not seeing the geared toward, you know, Imhotep, you know, is geared toward college excellence, you know, but here lately, what it's known for is cranking out athletes. You know, I don't know what the rest of their student body is doing, but they make a note to highlight the student athletes that are going to Division I schools. So I had a choice where I went. Now, my first school was Edison. I got there and I was the only person who spoke English in my class. And that was intimidating to me. So I transferred out immediately that day, but I was able to transfer into a school that had exactly what I wanted. So I would say I'm for school choice.
Now, Dr. Holmes, you come from a different era. You come from a time when, you know, our people were forced to go to segregated schools. And then I think we fought to go to, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, white schools, not because necessarily we wanted to be with white people, but because we felt like they were preserving the best education and the best resources for their children and denying our children. So from that context and that background, what's your opinion of the whole school choice discussion?
Yeah, well, first let me say this. I went to, some people call it a segregated school, and when I started, you know, we had outside toilets and all that stuff. But you know, but I consider it to be a liberation academy because we got an education that was superior to what white kids got. You know, because they were probably singing Dixie and learning about Robert E. Lee and not even learning that he ever lost the war. And you know, I grew up in Virginia, and in Virginia, it was one of about 6 to 7 states where Black teachers were better prepared in terms of level of education than white teachers. So during that era, we had superior teachers in a number of our states. Now, to this question of choice, we have to kind of deconstruct what the proponents of choice are talking about. They're really talking about, when you get down to it, they're talking about eliminating public education, and this is through a step-by-step process, by making it market-based, based on the market. And these same people are people who don't like to pay taxes. So the same people proponents of, let's say, vouchers and stuff like that, where you're actually subsidizing private schools, are the same people who don't want to pay taxes into the school system. It also, yeah, I'm kind of mixed on charter schools. I know I've been to. I was trying to think of the name. There's a charter school in South Philly that I went to that was very progressive. I don't know what's it doing now. And then there was that other school out there that was actually a Cheney grad had started a school that was really, they did well in terms of math and so forth. I can't think of the name of it. But again, you have a question of a private management team coming in. Teachers themselves have less protection, less legal protection, and in many ways you're kind of screened out from some of the stuff. So my fundamental problem with this school choice is that really it's a way of saying that we want to develop a school system based on the market and not based on public support, and we want to minimize, and some people even want to eliminate public schools altogether and make everything market and everything private. Now my question is, now after you've had this experience, would you like to start your own private, your own charter school network, or would you like to engage in maybe challenges to the charter school process? You know, either reform it or whatnot. How do you think?
I would love to start a network, man, in which I can create a team that can help solve some of these issues across the country. Like I said before, Arizona is not the only failing state in the country academically. So I know that these services are needed in more than just Arizona. And I think that some of the trouble I'm experiencing or seeing here in Arizona is also taking place in inner city schools across the country. So the network, to me, is more the direction that I would like to go.
We used to, back in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, there was a network called CB, Council of Independent Black Institutions, CIBI. And they were training people for independent institutions. In many ways, you know, you had something called the Ocean Hill Brownsville schools in Brooklyn, which was kind of almost a forerunner of the charter thing, except it was kind of Black conscious and Black self-determinant, so it had to go. But it was a community base. You had very skilled, in tune professionals, and who were working very closely with the parents and students. They were really a team. And again, it had to go because they stepped on some toes. Um, so I think there are a couple of paths to go. One way is to be an advocate and an activist and trying to reform the system somehow, and one way is to develop institutions that that can fill the gap.
My goal is to help. I prefer to help schools as well as parents. But what I refuse to do is allow these kids educational opportunities to just continue to be taken advantage of. You can go into some of these inner city schools in the city of Phoenix. For whatever reason, you can walk past a classroom and you can see 10 people in the classroom and 7 of them are asleep.
Mm.
And what's interesting, Ron, before you told me this today, with all my years in education, I didn't know that there were places that you could have charter schools and have teachers with no credentials.
Man, Taylor mentioned, I was listening to Taylor talk about his schools and the 30 schools that he were familiar with coming up. It's about 800 here.
Wow.
And so we're leading the country in charter schools. And can you imagine 800 schools? And so this is what I mean when I'm talking about the negative impact from hierarchy. You got 800 schools and none of those I don't even like using the word educators, but none of those people in the classroom have to have any credentials to be in there.
Mm.
And you're telling these kids to increase test scores. I mean, that's just, it's almost an oxymoron.
So I can
take an
graduate.
uneducated person, put them in a classroom, and you tell them to increase education. How do you do that?
I can graduate high school and then teach at one of these charter schools. Basically.
Correct.
Okay.
So my question is, whose pockets are getting laced? Because if you have that many charter schools, there has to be a kickback somewhere for people to A, lower the standards of the educators that are coming in, and B, water down the education that's being disseminated by these teachers. So, well, educate, we'll call people in the classroom, we'll call them that for lack of better words. But where are the kickbacks? Where is this going? If the child isn't first in primary, then who is? And it sounds like the people who are funding these ventures are the ones that are getting the kickback somewhere down the line financially. And it almost becomes like a rat race to see who can have the most schools and most students and get the most money back.
It's funny you should say that. I'll have to start with the governor, but here's what I will say. I'm not even familiar with why the governor is involved in the education system. I'm still trying to figure that one out because you have a superintendent of instruction, and that position oversees every school regardless of its sector in the state of Arizona. The problem that I have is how can you have a position such as that and that person isn't an educator?
Right.
Yeah,
She's an earologist or audiologist. I said, well, to me, this is a problem because you don't know how to go into an underperforming school and help because you don't have the background yourself and you're at the highest level.
See, that's one of the problems since the 80s. State legislators have been trying to take over running the schools.
Yeah.
And not only are you talking about people who generally are not educators, but you're talking about people who weren't necessarily the standout students in whatever field they were in. And so you're talking about and again, I don't know if kickback is the proper term, but you're talking about profit because if you have a contract and in that contract, you have certain amount of money, and if you can hire at the lowest amount of money, you can hire someone who's not fully educated, not fully qualified, and you can hire them at a low salary. You can have threadbare, resources available for students and whatnot. And like you said, you didn't have the kind of support services for the students. Then that means more profit for that management team.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that just kind of falls into the other thing. Then you have to look at where the books come from, who the book supplies, you know, for the other stuff. You have to look at the kind of the backward linkages and the, you know, the forward linkages in this thing is what's downstream. And that's book contracts, food contracts. I remember when the black superintendent in Philadelphia, they said he committed suicide or whatever, but he was under a lot of stress because he had changed the milk contract, and the milk contract was with some heavy duty folks up there. So you know, so all of that. So when you begin to look at schools not as an essential thing that has to happen, that's publicly in the public interest, but you merely look at it as private property and private profit, then it just becomes another you know, another thing that you can just squeeze as much money out of. And if you're talking about I guess Mason, I don't know, Phoenix, when I was in Phoenix, I saw mostly Latino kids, you know, Latinx folks, and you know, and so if you're in that situation and you're looking at folks as not being you know, up to par, and maybe if you are neo-colonialist, maybe you might be from the same group, but you don't care too much either, then you know, that's you know, that's how it goes, because you say, hey, these people are working 3 or 4 jobs, they don't have time to complain.
Right.
You know, they don't know all the time where you go to complain and this kind of stuff. So it's a very horrendous situation, but it's happening. You know, the big school systems of Philly, and the same guy who did Philly is also down in New Orleans now, was in New Orleans. And it's almost, I think it's totally charter now. Philly became charter because the state of Pennsylvania, Philly needed money really bad, and they said, the only way we're going to give you the money, it was a Republican control legislature, and they said, the only reason we give you money if you bring in the school choice. And the school choice that they did was probably about the best school choice that they could do in terms of the options that they put together in Philly. But they wouldn't have gotten any money from the state, necessary money, if they had just gone the way they wanted to go.
I don't have a problem with the charter sector. I just think the hierarchy should provide more policies and procedures that would make sure, regardless of the sector, that these kids are being properly educated. One of the things I talk about in my book, because you have these kids that don't have to go to college, they come right into the classroom, they don't understand poverty. They don't understand the afflictions of poverty and how those things enter the classroom. And so they don't realize that the kid is hungry. Instead, they think he's being rude and disrespectful, so they punishing them consistently until the kid does something to make it seem like he's always been wrong, and they remove him from the school. Those are the type of things that's taking place. In this state, I'm debating with people now because they have what they like to call a state test. And I said, you don't have a state test, you have a state survey. An assessment is something that assesses the person that's taking the test. And then there are consequences for not passing that test. If you don't pass the test, you may not pass the class. You don't pass the test, you may not pass the grade. You don't pass the test, you may not get a job. You don't pass the sobriety test, you may go to jail. Regardless of the number of times you fail the test in this state, it has no effect on the kids. They can continue to fail it and graduate. So how is that purposeful? In fact, it affects the teachers. And the teachers could lose their jobs based on the kids and their performance on the test. And I'm trying to say students' indifferent attitudes towards testing cannot have a negative impact on teacher performance. You mean to tell me it's the teacher's fault because the teacher can't get this kid to stop thinking about being evicted enough to pass this test? Let me see you do it. Right. Because the state can't get their own representatives to do their job. And by the way, I forgot to tell you, the reason I know that representative is not doing his job was because I was a state representative for 2 years.
Now,
And so I know exactly what that person should have been doing.
Ron, that's a good place for us to kind of close out with, as you know, as the time draws near. I want you to tell people how they can join you in your fight, because it sounds like you're trying to, you know, counter some of this negativity. So
I'm definitely trying to unite. You can reach out to me on my webpage, innercitylifecoaching.org, and there's ways that you can contact me through there. And I'm thinking we can put an elective group of educators across the country together and just provide some of these services for the inner city kids. And I'm gonna do my best with the nonprofit to raise money that will help us do that across the country.
That was going to be my next question. When they go to your website, innercitylifecoaching.org, and we're going to have that up on the screen, can they also go to your website and make a donation to your organization?
I don't have that yet.
Okay.
I don't have that yet, where they can make it, where there's a link for that to be done, but I will. I'm glad you brought that up.
All right, and we'll keep looking for that. And let's talk about the book. How can people get your book? Do you have it with you? You can hold it up.
I do.
All right.
This is it. Choose education over crime. And the reason that I wrote this is I'm talking about the number of kids who don't understand the impact of a felony. These kids are walking around thinking it's okay to get a felony, or I've been to jail, or it's cool. Man, 30 years later, it's going to be the biggest mistake of your life. But for them, they can't foresee that. And that's why I think that assistance with the parent will come in, which is what I want to be able to do for that kid. Otherwise, they headed down the wrong road and there's no turning back from it.
And how can they get that book?
You can get this book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble as well on their websites.
Okay. Well, hey, Ron, we definitely want to thank you for joining us. But before we go, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to say the final word, because you have a lot of fire, so, which I knew already. But
right. Hey, man, I just appreciate this opportunity, man. And it's always good to have an educated conversation. I appreciate that, man, for giving me the time. And hopefully, man, we can all come together in some way or another, whether it's in school or not, and give our youth the education they deserve.
Definitely, brother. We want to appreciate you. Thank you. We appreciate you for being on. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Of course, I'm proud to see the work that you're doing, because, all the time years that I've known you, going back over 40 years. So I'm glad to see you doing so well, man, and that you have dedicated yourself to this fight. So we got to have you on again, brother.
Please do, man. Peace and blessings to you, brothers, man. Everybody stay safe.
All right. Thanks a lot, brother. Take care.
Absolutely.
Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought